Tackle the NFL action on FanDuel. Get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. 21 plus and present in Ohio. First online real money wager only. $5 first deposit required. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable bonus bets which expire 7 days after receipt. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Welcome to Mind Love, episode 282. Today's episode is all about how our connection creates our mind's idea of self.
This view of what I call the solo self, that the self is just inside the body alone, is not only wrong, but it could even be a lethal lie that's leading to loneliness, to addictions, like addiction to digital objects, that all are resulting in chaos and rigidity when a system's not integrated. What I suggest is that even if the human mind has in fact constructed this view of a solo self that's causing these pandemics, that's terrible news, and it's also good news. Because if the human mind constructed it, we still have time to course correct. And our human mind collectively with these conversations can actually identify the problem. And just like a person limping through life with a splinter, we can take their sock off, look under the sock, look at the sole of their feet, and remove the splinter that's giving them pain and giving them this trouble walking. I think the splinter of modern culture is the view of the solo self.
Turn up your frequency with Mind Love. Bite-sized brain hacks for seekers, dreamers, and doers. It's time to give your mind a little love with your host, Melissa Monti.
If this is your first time giving your mind a little love, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Mind love is a habit, and the more you give your mind that love and intention, the better you'll feel about yourself and your life. Plus, it's really a win-win because more subscribers means Mind Love attracts even more amazing guests to bring you their wisdom. So don't forget to subscribe. I want you to ask yourself something. Who am I? And don't just give the cliche, oh, I'm Liz from Wisconsin and I work in HR. I mean, what are you? How are you? What does it mean to be? And what is your relationship to all other things in this realm and beyond? I'm trying to get you to drill down on the concept of self. By intellectual standards, self is a central aspect of human consciousness, and it can be described as the subjective experience of being an individual with a unique identity. I've pondered this idea since I was a kid. Does everyone else experience self the same way I do? Is everyone as lonely as I am? Do people think the same way? Hear the same voices in their heads the same way? See colors the same way? Is anyone else even real, or did I just make them all up? I honestly still wonder that last one. But I've noticed that most people tend to view the idea of self as unchanging and fixed. Yeah, we might change our habits and our behaviors, and even the way we talk to ourselves. But overall, there's still this voice of resistance. There's still the higher version that sometimes comes out ahead. That essence is still the same. Or so we think. Because here's the thing. Research suggests that this idea of self is actually a dynamic and constantly evolving construct. Having a baby has really helped me understand this on a deeper level. Newborn babies have no idea that they're even separate people, or maybe even that they are a person. From my understanding, those first few months are more of an experience, sensing and merging with their environments. And as we age, we start to understand ourselves in different ways. Actually, in really different ways, depending on if we're still in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood. All shaped by our connection to the world around us. And it all happens without us even perceiving much of a change. But is this natural evolution of self the best thing for us, or even true? Or are we just concretizing an illusion of separateness and getting further from the oneness that was meant for us? Well, that's what we're talking about today. Our guest is Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and the founding co-director of the Mindful Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He's also the executive director of the Mindsight Institute, and he's the author of multiple books, including personal development bestsellers like Mindsight, and one of my favorite parenting books, The Whole Brain Child, and his newest book, Intra-Connected. 3 key things we will learn are how our sense of self changes throughout human development, what causes a mismatch between our inner sense of identity and our inner sense of belonging, and how to use the wheel of awareness practice to open yourself to access the wisdom of connection and systems intelligence in your life. Before we go deep today, I want to give you a little gift, and I want to give it to you every single day. It's called the Morning Mind Love. I know how life can be. You're all fired up after an inspiring episode, and then a new day or a new challenge comes at you, and it's just hard to keep up that energy. Well, the Morning Mind Love is kind of like an oracle from your higher self to help you start each day with a positive focus. Plus, when you sign up, you get 2 free gifts, a 30-minute binaural meditation and 30 days of journaling prompts to help you remember who you truly are. And it's all completely free. So join over 9,000 people and go to mindlove.com to sign up, or text the word morning to 33777. And now let's welcome Dan Siegel to the show.
Thanks for having me, Melissa. Great to be here.
So I have been a fan of yours for quite a while now, and I'm curious, what has inspired your latest work on the idea of transforming our experiences from disconnection to connection?
You know, so many layers have inspired it. One is just working with so many people as a therapist who are feeling some deep anxiety, some feeling that something's not right, and trying to understand the deep processes that may be underlying that, certainly from their own attachment experiences, but in the larger culture. Another has been just as an educator, really seeing how, whether it's in kids in schools or adolescents, or looking at how we are actually educating ourselves as a human family, that something seems to be not quite right in business as usual. And so I went on a search to try to understand how these might fit together. And then as a scientist, wanting to apply this field I work in, interpersonal neurobiology, which is basically bringing all the different ways of knowing, initially all the different sciences, and then indigenous teachings, contemplative teachings, together to say what might be going on right now that our human family has gone in a certain direction that in indigenous teachings and contemplative teachings is not consistent with what they see reality as being. But in science, we've kind of reduced things to small parts. But what would happen if you looked at the larger way those parts of things actually fit together as a systems? So systems are a way of looking at things coming together. And we can talk about system science, but that's also the science view. So as a scientist, as an educator, as a clinician, as just a human being on the planet, this has been a journey to try to look at what the self is, what our identity is, and then how belonging is shaped by that. And then it makes a suggestion as to what we've done not right, and then how we can course correct and actually improve the way we humans live on Earth and how we live within nature.
I was sharing before we started recording how I keep getting such similar messages in different voices and in different ways of explaining it recently. And in my mind, that tells me that maybe it's a collective drive to figure this out, especially after what's gone on in the last couple of years. And one of the ways you explained it in your book that really caught my attention was how, our sense of self, our brains and our wiring and our society all kind of drive us towards this idea of separateness, this individual. But when that happens within the body and one cell starts to see itself as separate, that's what we call cancer. And that just hit me in this visual way where I'm like, oh my gosh. And I'm going through this period of life. I'm 37 right now, and I am in the middle of building my family, and I moved to a small town, and I have been living in that very individual sense of self for most of my life, like an only child, moved around a lot. It just felt safer in a way. And now I'm realizing that it's not adding to my happiness in any way. And so since in the last couple of years, I've just reverted the way I've been thinking and have been really placing a priority on connection and belonging and my community. And I'm already noticing a huge difference, but I can see where I still have work to do. I can see where my mind kind of pulls me out of that and wants to go back to its separateness. And so I'm wondering if that is almost like this unhealthy, it's an unhealthy way of being. It can be thought of as, the individual self almost living as a cancer, trying to be on its own the whole time. Why do you
Mhm.
think we've developed so that our minds and our wiring guide us in that direction?
Well, Melissa, that is just a fabulous, fabulous question. And I think if we begin with what we're doing, which is sharing words, we actually come to some really interesting insights about your question. Like, why did we do this if it's not healthy for us, right? And even one way of defining an addiction is you come to be aware that something's not good for you and you continue doing it, whatever that thing is. It's a really powerful view of addiction. So in a way you could say modern culture has gotten us addicted to a separate view of self. Some people would even say, well, Melissa and Dan, listen, self is the same word as individual, isn't it? And so then you might say, well, what's in a word? So let's just take a moment and say that the words we use are like the tip of an iceberg, right? You can see it floating on the ocean and you can see the tip. So we can say the word self, what does that really mean? Well, beneath that tip of the iceberg, just beneath the surface, are concepts that sometimes you don't even see when you're just in a boat above the surface. But if you take, a scuba diving trip or a submarine underneath, you go, whoa, there are concepts that are underneath that word. And beneath the concepts, there are actually categories, the way we divide the world up into features, aspects, the way we come to understand it. These categories and concepts exist before and beneath words. But then once we produce a word, like in modern culture, self, we then make all sorts of ways of living based on that word and its definition. So in the book Intraconnected, I had this experience when I was studying with some system scientists from MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and we all went on a retreat in Colorado. And we spent 3 days by, quote, ourselves in the forest. And you could call it alone time, but each of us had more the experience of all one time. And when we came back to talk about it, everyone was saying beautiful things like I was interconnected, I was interwoven, I was interdependent, I was interlaced. And then it was my turn to speak from this body. And I said, I really connect with everything you're saying. Yet I can't really use the prefix inter because the experience was there was the body, but there was the creek, there was the sky, there were the trees, and I was all of it. So I guess I would say I was not interconnected because that's like the connection of me to something else. The betweenness, it was more like withinness. So I guess I would say I was, and there wasn't a word. So then I said I was intra-connected, and everyone's kind of nodding their heads and yeah, that feels right. Well, when I went back to type out, some notes about what that 3-day experience was, every time I'd write intra-connected, a connectedness of the whole, it would convert it, the word processor, would autocorrect it to interconnected. And I said, something's wrong with my computer. But it turns out there is no word, at least in English, for the connectivity of the whole. So then I started thinking, wow, intra-connection has the feeling of the wholeness that maybe we need, and yet we don't even have a word. So then there wouldn't be a concept easily talked about or a category of what's the wholeness. So that began the journey to say, if self is thought of as self-experience, that is the center of basically energy and information flow, if that's what self is, why does that center have to be limited to your body? And the experience in the forest was the center of the experience of energy flow was the body, the creek, the trees, the sky. It was the wholeness. And that was the experience of self, which has a sensation, a subjectivity to it, a perspective or point of view, and an agency, how you act on behalf of something. So that spells an acronym in English, SPA, sensation or subjectivity, perspective, and agency. And then I thought, wow, maybe we have like an identity lens that you can learn like a camera to be close up and say, sure, I have an inner self, but I don't have to get rid of this inner self. I can also realize I have an inter self. I have a self in the betweenness. And then there's a wholeness of it all, an intra self, which is where I am the within and the between. And then I had already been using the word me plus we equals we, how you integrate me and we. And then I thought, okay, well, this is kind of coming full circle, that maybe we need some languaging, because human beings have a drive for certainty. And in modern culture, when we feel a threat or we feel, that there's a scarcity, then we start getting really close in and we define the self as an entity, like a noun. And the entity view of self-experience has the illusion of certainty, so we can have predictability, right? And that has trying to give us a feeling of safety in the world. So it's understandable. So to answer your question, all of that is underneath, I think, why we have a drive in modern culture to say the self is separate, because it gives us this, what the Rashid quote, this artist named Rashid in the Brooklyn Public Library, it says, having discovered the flimsy fantasy of certainty, I decided to wander. Well, this flimsy fantasy, I think, is what we do when we try to make identity an entity so we can have certainty. That's an illusion. That's a drive that's understandable, but it's really creating a false definition of who we are. We are much more than just the inner self. We're also our relationships, and we are the wholeness of connections within humanity and connections with all of nature.
You know what's funny? We spend so much time feeding our minds, reading books, listening to podcasts, learning new things, but then we grab whatever's convenient to feed our bodies. And I get it. Life is busy, and sometimes a drive-through feels like the only option. But that's why I take Field of Greens. It's a greens powder made with whole organic fruits and vegetables. No extracts, no lab-made stuff, and just 1 scoop a day gives you simple, real nutrition. Field of Greens feeds your body with fruits and vegetables medically chosen to support your heart, vital organs, and immune system. And let me tell you something. Since I started taking it, I've noticed these little changes that show me how nutrient depleted I must have been before. Like the ridges in my nails, gone. My sleep, so much better. And my stomach just feels happy. You know that dreaded afternoon crash that has you reaching for more coffee or sugary snacks? Well, that's not happening for me anymore. When your body is actually nourished, it runs so much better. I've tried other greens powders before, but Field of Greens is genuinely different. The quality is next level, and you can taste it. It's become my go-to, especially on those days when my eating isn't exactly Instagram worthy, because we all have those days, right? And here's the thing. They are so confident that you'll love it too, that they offer a 100% money-back guarantee. That's how much they believe in their product. So I got you 15% off your first order and free rush shipping. Visit fieldofgreens.com and use promo code MINDLOVE. That's promo code MINDLOVE at fieldofgreens.com. fieldofgreens.com.
You know what's interesting about mindfulness? It's not just about being present in the moment. It's about being thoughtful about the future. We meditate, we exercise, we work on ourselves, all to create a better tomorrow, right? But there's one piece of the future planning puzzle that nobody likes to talk about. I get it. Life insurance feels heavy. But here's the thing. Just like meditation is an act of self-care, getting life insurance is an act of family care. It's about making sure your love continues to support your family, even when you're not there to do it yourself. That's why I want to tell you about SelectQuote. They're one of America's leading insurance brokers with nearly 40 years of experience helping over 2 million customers. Their licensed insurance agents work for you to tailor a life insurance policy for your individual needs in as little as 15 minutes. And here's what's cool. They actually reward you for taking care of yourself. If you're in good health, they work with carriers that could get you same-day coverage for up to $5 million. No medical exam required. And it's way more affordable than you might think. You could even get coverage for up to $1 million for as little as $20 per month. We just did this all recently after putting it off for years, and I can't tell you the peace of mind just from getting it done. So get the right life insurance for you for less at selectquote.com/mindlove. Go to selectquote.com/mindlove today to get started. That's selectquote.com/mindlove. And our understanding of ourselves and the world is really sort of the boundaries of that are the language that you use. Like you talked about, we didn't have a word for that. So it's really hard for us to perceive something as reality when we don't have a word for it. I remember learning how people with less opportunities for education tend to be more volatile, or they basically fit their experience into the emotions that they actually have words for. So they'll, instead of experiencing melancholy, they just go straight to anger because they know what being mad is like, or depressed, or whatever. And so I always found that interesting, along with, I remember learning something about, I forget which culture. They don't actually have a word for the color pink like we do. It's light red. And that's so interesting because that's all pink is light red. And so they actually experience the color in a different way. And there was this whole essay that I read on it. Found that fascinating. And so if we don't have a word that really helps us to understand this sense of identity, and there's so many words that I'll be reading some self-development book, and it'll say like, well, we don't have a word for this, but in the Japanese culture, they call it this. And our word is like 7 words together to define what this sense of belonging or whatever is. And so maybe that's what we're all moving towards, is this push towards, well, we need words for this so that we can experience it more deeply. And one of the things that came to mind when I was talking about how so many different things are giving me the same information in totally different ways of visualizing it. Have you ever read or looked into The Headless Way by Douglas Harding?
The Headless Way, no.
It's this, Douglas Harding was a philosopher and a spiritualist from hundreds of years ago, and he went down this path called the Headless Way, and it's kind of difficult to understand at first, but he basically was saying that his awareness opens up when he experiences life as having no head. And I'm reading this and it's not really making a lot of sense. There's this whole website called The Headless Way with all these activities to expand your sense of awareness. But what got me was a physicist drew a self-portrait. And most of the time you see a self-portrait and it's your head, and like your upper body or maybe your whole body. And instead, all you see, it's the view of him sitting on a couch. So you see his legs and his arms on the couch. But then it's the rest of the room. And he calls that the self-portrait. And there's something about that clicked for me, where he was saying, no, what I am includes my entire sense of awareness. And when I drop the idea that I have this head and I'm confined to the skin, then everything that I'm experiencing changes my sense of self, and I can evolve as I move through life because life is moving through me. And he has all these activities to help you see this in a different way. But that brings me back to what you're saying in really expanding this sense of self, expanding beyond the boundaries of skin, to see that who we are isn't just the I am that we've always perceived ourselves to be, but it's a part of the whole.
Exactly. And when you think of the part of the whole, and the words we use are so important, because like if you say the whole is literally WHOLE, the whole of everything, then for some people, they might say, well, wait a second, don't I have a self that is Melissa or that is Dan? And so what is really useful to name here in our conversation is the concept of integration. That integration is defined as a system that has both differentiation and it has linkage. So that, yes, there's a body that was named Melissa when you were born, a body called Dan, and those are inner aspects of the self, but there's also a relational way where our connections with one another, and in fact, the wholeness of the whole system is also this center of experience, so that we're going to define as the self. So the reason this conversation is so important, and I'm so grateful to be here with you, Melissa, is that one conversation at a time, it's possible to change culture. And there's a phenomenon when we understand the science of the mind, which is that we perceive what we believe. So some people say that as, there's no such thing as immaculate perception, meaning this headless way you're talking about from Douglas Harding, is, for me, in modern science terms, the way I would say it is when you look at how the higher parts of the brain, the cortex, develops its neural architecture, it's through learning. So when we learn something, for example, what a word means, self is your body, then what happens is there is a filter that is the basis basically of what we believe is true, right? And this includes the categories and concepts that we have. So our beliefs are based on our conceptual and categorizing systems of the mind that are learned from our experiences with our parents, with our peers, with our teachers, out in the bigger school system, out in the world. So we keep on developing these belief systems. Now, the reason that's so important is because literally, even though we take in senses, we extract from those senses what we perceive. So even though sensation may be the headless way, which is beautiful, it's like a bottom-up beginner's mind, fantastic. Most often what we're doing is taking those sensations, filtering them into what we already believe is true. So we perceive what we believe is the simple way of remembering that. And then when you realize that, then you go, wow, if I believe the self is just in my body, then if I hear a word like self-regulation or self-understanding or self-compassion or, awareness or any of these uses of the word self, they're implying that that word means just what's going on inside the body. So what I try to do as a clinician and educator and scientist is say, let's be really careful of even beautiful things like self-awareness or self-compassion. Absolutely beautiful. Let's just add the word inner to either call it inner self-compassion or just drop the word self, say inner compassion, inner awareness. That's all fine. So this is saying you do have an inner aspect of experience. So the integration idea is that you differentiate, you have an inner experience, I have an inner experience, and we have an inter experience, the betweenness. And when we realize we have the wholeness, then I am not just this body called Dan, I am also Melissa, literally. And if I can open up to that, that's called empathy and compassion. It's a whole different way of living. So when I walk down the street, there's a feeling of expansion that in traditional science terms, we study with three emotions. We study compassion, gratitude, and awe. And it is an awe-filled experience to then learn that you have this identity lens, that you can, with intention, expand it from the inner to the inter to the intra. You have this capacity with your decision to do it. And that's what I try to do in the book Interconnected, to say, look, we in modern culture, for business as usual, we've constricted our identity lens to call the self just the body. And in fact, that limited identity constricts our belonging. So people are running around with incredible amounts of anxiety, incredible loneliness. There's something that feels not quite right. So whether you're out in the world, in a school, or in a government, or in a company, or more close to home, you're in a family, or you're just inside your own skin and go, oh, I don't know, the culture is telling me one thing, but the feeling is I'm anxious. So, oh my God, I better consume a lot. I better watch a lot of things on the TV. I better play a lot of games. I better do something because I don't feel good. And part of what I hope can happen with the viral pandemic doing its terrible, devastating things, people marginalized more than those who are in positions of power, but it's affecting everyone, is to realize, and I quote a number of indigenous elders who were in this documentary called Rooted Messages. In the book, I quote them with their permission. They're saying, let's wake up. The viral pandemic has made us very aware that we are all connected to one another. And in fact, not just the viral pandemic, but you can say that this view of what I call the solo self, that the self is just inside the body alone, is not only wrong, but it could even be a lethal lie that's leading to racism and social injustice, to misinformation and polarization, to loneliness, to addictions, like addiction to digital objects, and even to the climate crisis we're in, that all are resulting in chaos and rigidity when a system's not integrated. But what I suggest is that even if the human mind has in fact constructed this view of a solo self that's causing these pandemics, that's terrible news. And it's also good news, because if the human mind constructed it, we still have time to course correct. And our human mind collectively with these conversations can actually identify the problem. And just like a person limping through life with a splinter, we can take their sock off, look under the sock, look at the sole of their feet, and remove the splinter that's giving them pain and giving them this trouble walking. I think the splinter of modern culture is the view of the solo self. And we have time to remove that splinter and actually live a different way.
One thing that comes to mind for me is I always go back and forth with, okay, well, do we have this natural tendency to destroy ourselves? Or is this by design? And maybe it's because many of the people with the most power have such a sense of solo self that they create systems and processes in a way, and I say systems lightly, not in the way that you say it, but like the systemic issues that basically create us all, like our education system, our, like there's so many things that we all can identify that need deep, deep changes. And it seems like we know it all, but it's hard to ever get there. But I like what you said about kind of expanding our awareness to how you said, like in this moment, you're experiencing yourself as, or you are Melissa because we are together at this moment. That's one thing that they talk about in the headless way. It's like, well, right now I see your head. I don't see mine. So I have yours, and also reframing things as inner versus just ourself. Because one of the big steps I took toward my self-growth was actually, you explained it really precisely on how you feel uncomfortable, like you just feel this discomfort. So you have this need to numb. It was basically my entire 20s. And even now, like there's times where I'm like, okay, well, what am I doing? Why am I doing this thing I don't even want to be doing that I know is not for my best self? What else was I feeling? Can I go back to that? Can I sit in it? Can I experience the discomfort? Can I ask what's underneath it? And that's opened me up to so much, because you're right. Like I experienced a sense of self just below the surface, below the skin. And I feel these sensations and think, well, like I'm just uncomfortable here. Maybe I need to go home or whatever it is. But instead it's like, oh, interesting. This is the energy that I experience in this group of people. Or this is the energy that I experience in this part of the world or in this room. What's in this for me? And instead of running from it, kind of looking at it as with curiosity and seeing what can open up there. And maybe with that mindset, it's not discomfort. It's just that it's unfamiliar, and that's why it felt uncomfortable. And so I've sort of been playing with that and reading books on being an empath and whether people resonate with that word or not. To me, it's just this idea that we're always sensing energies, some of us more than others, whether we're wired that way, whether we've had experiences that have opened up that for us or closed it off for us, whatever it is that leads some of us to be very sensitive to other emotions. It can be uncomfortable, like I said, because it's unfamiliar, but what happens? How do we evolve? How do we understand each other better if we're just willing to open up that lens, like you say, and be willing to experience it? Because I feel like that's the only way that we can really develop that empathy.
Yeah. Well, it's really beautiful, Melissa, what you're saying. What emerges as you're saying it is the distinction between nouns and verbs.
We're all searching for something better in life, right? Better habits, better mindset, better relationships. But when it comes to hiring, searching isn't always the best approach. Instead of searching, why not match? That's where Indeed comes in. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. It's your go-to matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors. Their matching engine helps you find quality candidates fast. And I mean really fast. Did you know that in the minute I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed worldwide? That's what I love about Indeed. It's like having a mindful hiring assistant. Instead of getting overwhelmed by endless resumes, you can schedule, screen, and message candidates all in one place. The platform actually learns your preferences, so the more you use it, the better it gets at finding people who align with your vision. And get this, 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites. That's why more than 3.5 million businesses worldwide use Indeed to hire great talent fast. I just love that it keeps all of my hiring processes organized. I can do everything right there instead of having spreadsheets and notes and video call links. And listeners of the show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/mindlove. Just go to Indeed.com/mindlove right now and support the show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/mindlove. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed.
Yeah. Well, it's really beautiful, Melissa, what you're saying. What emerges as you're saying it is the distinction between nouns and verbs. So that in languaging, when we have a noun, it's an entity that has boundaries. It feels like you can hold it. It's a thing, right? A verb is an unfolding, emergent process, really, that is, not containable, right? In modern English, we have mostly nouns. In indigenous languages like the Potawatomi in North America or the Aborigine in what we call Australia, there are mostly verbs. So given what we said before about the tip of the iceberg, if you start speaking with each other as nouns, and you certainly name the self as a noun, an entity, then, as we're discussing this, it gives the illusion, the impression of certainty. So unfortunately, then, if you start living with this view of self as noun, there's something very uncomfortable because it's actually not only a noun, it's really more a verb, but that discomfort gets you to do more drive. You have more of a drive for certainty, right? To have something be contained, something that's predictable, something that then feels safe. So in that drive for certainty, you get kind of empowerment. You get a feeling like, okay, if this entity called Melissa or this entity called Dan can act in a certain way, then I know what the bottom line is of everything. And when you start living like that, it's, some people call this a hedonic treadmill because you're running faster, and the faster you run, the more discomfort you feel. So then you feel like, well, I know the rule. Myself is an entity. Entities need things. Let me consume things, whether it's food or objects or money or power or whatever. So let me get these things. The more I accumulate this stuff, the less I feel good. So that means I need more stuff. So it goes on and on and on. So breaking that cycle is the process of moving from a noun-like view of self to verb. And in the unfolding of verb-like energy flow, as you mentioned, you get to start understanding there are things called emergent properties of systems that are, basically have certain features to them, that the interaction of those elements, of these processes, gives rise to something. But you don't control it. You let emergence happen. You don't own it. You don't control it. You can't always predict it. So you drop into a very different space of mind where you go, I am going to let life happen. And in a practice that we do called the Wheel of Awareness at our institute, and I was able to do this before the viral pandemic with 50,000 people in person, when they drop into the center of this wheel, which is a metaphor for awareness, and let themselves distinguish the awareness in the hub of the wheel from the rim, they drop from being a noun-like experience often on the rim to a verb-like emergence in the hub, and everything starts to change. And people start talking about things that as a scientist, I never would have predicted. They start talking about feeling connected to everything and everyone, start talking about love, start talking about feeling at home, feeling a peace they've never known before, a joy. And, it's one thing if one or two people had the experience, but when I did it with 50,000 people and the percentage of them who took the microphone shared a similar experience, it was like, wow. So every morning I do the wheel of awareness, for example. I wake up in a body. I say, okay, it's morning. I'm doing my wheel of awareness practice. And when I get to bending this spoke of attention that you're moving around the rim into the hub, there's this joyful emergence comes out in different ways that feels timeless. It feels connected. And then the verb-like reality of who we are starts to really become very clear in awareness. Now, I always say to people, like if we're at a workshop, for example, you are both a noun and a verb, so that you've experienced the wheel of awareness, you've experienced this timeless sense of love and connection that's beautiful. Now the workshop is ending. You're going to get on your bicycle or get on your car. When you leave the workshop, you're going to come to something that you know is a traffic light. A red light will be there. Take your noun-like body, take your noun-like foot, press on that noun-like brakes, and stop that noun-like car, because you will become one with everything in the intersection if you're just like realizing it's all one thing. So we are differentiated as noun-like entities, and we need to stop at traffic lights or we will be at a terrible accident. So this is where integration is so helpful. We are nouns and we are verbs. We're kind of close up in the inner bodily experience, and we're the whole shebang, and when you embrace this integration, and if people are listening to us and wondering, how can I do that? Try the wheel of awareness practice out, and you don't have to listen to Melissa and me. You can experience it for yourself. And when people do, and in the back of the book, I talk about the wheel and other things that you can do. When they do, it relieves them of something that feels really false. That flimsy fantasy of certainty is embedded in thinking you're only a noun. So the solo self, that's this lethal lie, is the view that the self is only a noun-like entity. You do have a body. You do have an inner experience. Stop at the traffic light. And at the same time, you're also this timeless, interconnected being. And this is where verb and noun are very helpful in us speaking with each other about this.
I remember in like third grade having to make an ecosystem, and I think we made it in like Coke bottles or something. But you look at it and you just think of it, it's like, oh, that's the whole, it's the ecosystem. Whereas we're this sense of self that we might be the little plant or the moisture or whatever, where we're only identifying with one, but it's easy to look at something else that we're holding and seeing that as a whole. But it's like if you zoom into the inside of the body, our anatomy is so complex. And we have all these cells that all have these things, but they don't survive without each other. Just like even if we look at our sense of self, we don't survive without everything else. The trees make the oxygen. That's what we're breathing in. We have to drink water. We have to eat food. We have to belong. Like we know the science of loneliness and how that affects our health and our lifespans. We die off if we're isolated. And so it's funny that we can look at other things. We can look at an ant farm and it's just the ant farm. We're rarely zooming in on the individual ants. But for some reason, we have a difficult time zooming out and seeing ourselves in this giant ecosystem called humanity or Earth, or however far you want to zoom out, the solar system, the universe. And so that's one of the ways that I've been trying to expand that sense of awareness. Also, inspired by the Headless Way, he talks about that, how it's interesting. You see me as a whole, you see me as I see me from one perspective only. But the further you zoom in, you lose me. You lose that idea of what we think each other is. And the further you zoom out, you lose it too. You see the whole of humanity. And so it brings to mind also Greg Braden, the Divine Matrix, how he talks about like that space in between. And you had this really beautiful quote in your book: who we are is both potential and actual, both the plane of possibility and the positions above that plane, as plateaus of increased probability and peaks of actualization. And so I love the idea of also shifting our consciousness into this verb rather than a noun, because it opens me up to the idea that I'm in a state of constant evolution. I'm not just this solid form. And we know that even if we zoom into our skin, it's not this solid form that we always think it is. It's actually a bunch of moving energy, and we're mostly space. And so if we remember that, I don't know, it just opens up so many things, like this new, that was actually one of the main teaching points that brought me back to the idea of God, honestly. I was raised religious and didn't really identify with that as I grew into adulthood. And then for a long time, through trauma, through just life experience, my rebellious 20s, I remember just being like, there is no God. There's nothing, like how can there be? And the deeper I dive into spirituality, and instead of visualizing God as some man on a cloud and being able to see what it actually is, this infinite possibility that's always there, always moving parts, always connecting us, opening up to miracles, that's when something clicked for me. And I was just able to sort of tap into deeper parts of, I guess, understanding reality than I was before.
Yeah, well, that's so beautiful. I think that when you say, well, why, do we keep on clinging to the idea of a noun like separate self? Part of it is that you get some illusion that you can control it, and so you think if you can control it, then you're going to be safe and certain, because you're in charge. So, I used to teach with a dear friend named John O'Donohue, who was an Irish Catholic priest, who was also an Irish mystic and a philosopher and a poet. And when John and I would teach together, people were kind of surprised because, his background and my background is very different. But what we found was this incredibly exciting common ground. John was a spiritual teacher. He was very religious. I'm trained as a scientist, and I'm a clinician and educator. And what that wheel of awareness practice was able to show in doing it with so many people was that in pure awareness, you got access to this place of possibility that some people say is God for them. And some people say it's joy, peace, you're at ease. And when I tried to find formal academic, empirically based sciences that could help understand why people had this first person immersion in those feelings, experiences in the hub, there came an opportunity to actually map out what the mind is, what you're referring to, Melissa, a few moments ago, as the plane of possibility, plateaus of probability, and these peaks of actuality. And it came from being with 150 physicists who said, when I kept on asking them, what is energy? Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. Now, in that view, you can actually map it out, and you can show that what they call the quantum vacuum or sea of potential, in their terms, this is physics, not poetry, but it is a formless source of all form. And in this view, the formless source of all form, you see that this what we map out on this diagram as the plane of possibility is filled with potentiality, the formless. And what arises from that potentiality is the movement to these subsets of plateaus of what might be possible to peaks of actuality. And in looking at all that, and sadly, John passed almost 15 years ago, but when we did a 10-year memorial for him, a celebration of his life, I was doing the Wheel of Awareness with everyone in the 2-day event. And then I was giving what I'm about to say to you. And what happened was I said the following thing, and the second row was filled with Catholic priests that had been in his, educational system in his school. And what I said then was, this plane of possibility is the generator of diversity. And if you make an acronym out of that, it's the GOD. And for those who are science-minded, that's an exciting view. For those who are religious-minded, I thought, oh my God, this is going to be sacrilegious. So I went up to them during the break and I said, I'm so sorry. Was that harmful? Was that hurtful to you? They go, in their Irish brogue, they said, not at all. It was so beautiful. And we know John would have loved that, which he did, because what it does is it bridges science and spirituality. It allows us to have a deep dive into the science of physics, looking at the science of energy, and then saying, could it be that whether you believe in a theistic view of reality or you don't, that there is this generator of diversity, this GOD, which is the portal through which integration arises, and integration looks like it's the basis of well-being and flourishing. So then you go, oh my gosh, if we can drop into that generator of diversity, which I do every morning and my colleagues do when we do the Wheel of Awareness. In the hub, you get this experience of, I let go and let the God, I let God, however you want to interpret that word. For me, it's the generator of diversity. And when you embrace that, you let love emerge. You let love be the force that creates integration in the world. And then, Melissa, you and I can be here, or if John were still here and he had a deep belief in a Catholic view of God, but there are people in the Hindu faith who have their belief, people in the Islamic faith, they have their belief, the Jewish faith, different versions of Christianity. But we all can come together and create a world where love is the natural light that allows us to join with each other. To be integrated means we differentiate and honor each other's different perspectives, and then link with compassionate communication, with respect, of mutuality. And, this in some ways helps us link indigenous teachings from thousands of years ago, contemplative teachings from thousands of years ago, religious teachings, maybe from hundreds and thousands of years ago. Thousands of years ago and hundreds of years ago, bringing them all together, where even if you want to stay firmly grounded in empirical science, we now have a bridge between science and spirituality. So how does that sit with you, Melissa, and your journey?
It's the only thing that makes sense.
¿Hablas español?
Sprichst du Deutsch?
Komm du noch?
If you've heard that sound from Babbel before, I bet you do. Babbel is the science-backed language learning app that actually works. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. With over 16 million subscriptions sold and a 20-day money-back guarantee, just start speaking another language with Babbel. Right now, up to 55% off your Babbel subscription at babbel.com/Spotify podcast. Spelled BABBEL.com/Spotify podcast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
We now have a bridge between science and spirituality. So how does that sit with you, Melissa, and your journey?
It's the only thing that makes sense, honestly. I remember in my 20s, when I was in the deep belief of no God, I remember saying to a college roommate, the only way I'll ever believe in God is if science starts to prove it. and then I kind of went to the other side and got pretty woo-woo, but then I felt like something was missing, and I always just had this desire to sort of bridge the two. And there were so many different things that I learned, and one of the things that my mind automatically does is I'll remember something that I learned 12 years ago, where I'm like, wait, that has something to do with this, even though it's in completely different forms. I feel like that's what makes me good at podcasting. But the understanding of that sea of potential, seeing that as God, seeing how so many cultures across time have come to the same conclusions and maybe just had their own ways based on their culture, based on the words that they had, the systems or the communities that they had. And that's why it's been cultivated in a different way or understood in a different way. That makes sense to me. That I can see how that manifests into our ideas, into our beliefs. And so I want to make sure that my listeners really understand how to do this wheel of awareness so that they can expand their awareness as well to the idea of intra-connectedness over just the sense of self. So can you walk us through what your morning practice looks like?
Sure. You can do this anytime that fits with your schedule. And, you can do this anytime that fits with your schedule in terms of, morning, afternoon, evening, but try to find a time where you can, have some really sacred, protected time where you're not going to be interrupted by digital objects or people. The beginning, you can explore this in just a few minutes, but ultimately the full wheel of awareness can take about 20 minutes. It's a practice where you can learn it from a book called Becoming Aware, which gives you a 21-day program, or the bigger book is Aware, which gives you a deep dive into the plane of possibility and stuff as a concept. So in the morning, I get up and get myself ready to do a reflective practice. Some people call it a meditation, which just means training the mind. So then you begin by imaging the wheel, a wheel. It's a metaphor. It's actually a table in our office. And on the rim are 4 different segments. each of them are energy flow. So we have energy flow from outside the body we live in, and that can be in the form of sound through hearing, photons in terms of light for seeing, then smell and taste, which are chemical energy flow, and even touch. So you explore each of those in turn, one by one. So you're training the focus of attention. Then you move the spoke of attention, a singular spoke, to the second segment, and that's energy flow from inside the body, muscles and bones in different regions, the organs, the genitals, you're going through your heart, your intestines, things like that. And I walk you through this whole thing. Then you experience then the whole of the body. So now you're transitioning from focused attention. Now we're going to open up awareness, the second pillar of this practice. And you move the spoke over to the third segment, which are mental activities like memories, emotions, beliefs, attitudes, longings, desires, hopes, dreams, thoughts, all that stuff. We'll call that mental imagery. It's probably activity up in your head, if you will. But we'll call it mental activities. And you explore all of those one by one, but in an open way. You just invite them in, like the poem, The Guest House by Rumi. Then when you get used to doing that in a more advanced practice, you bend the spoke around into the hub itself. So you're aiming it from the hub all around the rim, but now you're sending it out from the hub back into the hub itself. Or some people like to just retract it or have leave it in the hub or have no spoke at all. You're basically dropping into pure awareness. And for many people, this is where things start to shift. Things become timeless. You start feeling a sense of connection to everything. Every morning for me, it's different, but it always has this quality like I've entered a different realm. And you'll see in the Aware book or other books in Interconnected, what that other realm may correlate with scientifically, because we do have two realms, just like you can walk on land and swim in water. One reality, but you have a water realm and an air realm. We also have these two realms, which we can talk about if you want. But anyway, you get to drop into that. In some ways, Isaac Newton figured out the large object realm, and those properties are one thing, but quantum physicists about 100 years ago, compared to 350 years ago for Newton, figured out the quantum realm. And what's interesting was someone did the wheel and brought me to Isaac Newton's house in England, where we did around the apple tree where he figured out gravity. We actually did the wheel of awareness so people could drop out of Newtonian realm reality, where things are like entities and time and space, separate us, to the quantum realm, and people could experience it. It was kind of absolutely like mind-blowing. But anyway, so you do that. And then once you experience that, you then send the spoke out again to the fourth segment, and that you experience your relationality to people people you don't know, all humanity and all of nature. And then you do these offerings of wishes for the well-being of all living beings, your inner self and your integrated self as mui. Me plus we is mui.
What comes to mind when you go through that process is, I remember years ago doing one of Dr. Joe Dispenza's meditations on balancing chakras. And his process is really just first you focus on one chakra, the color, but then you focus to the area around it and then a little bit further out of that. And I remember the first time I did this, I'm like, what is this really doing? Just me thinking, expanding my awareness to this outside of myself. But as I've practiced more, and not just with his method, but learned from other people and experienced it myself, really has brought a deeper understanding to what that does. And I talked earlier about understanding how I pick up energy from other people and bringing awareness to that rather than automatically assuming, well, I'm just in a bad mood now. It's like, wait, I wasn't before I walked into this room. Why do I feel uncomfortable? And I'll bring awareness to the outside of my body instead. And it's the more I've practiced that, the more I can feel that field of energy around myself. Like it's palpable in a way that I'd never understood before I started bringing my awareness to it over and over again. And I'm also reminded of an interview I did about a year ago with Dr. Leaf. He wrote a book on how our cells communicate, but this one part stood out to me. He brought up this study that just gazing at a tree for a period of time causes the cells inside our body to harmonize in ways to where we can begin healing ourselves just by staring at this tree. And that reminds me of, okay, well, what you're doing there is you're bringing your awareness to the intraconnectedness, if I'm using your word correctly, but of your reality between you and that tree. And so you're not just alone. You're part of that tree. The tree is a part of you in that moment of awareness. And so I live in nature now, and so I go on these long walks, and it's something that I focus on because I'm grateful to be surrounded by trees. But it's like, well, that's just a tree. What else? What else does bringing my attention to expand within me, expand beyond me, open me up to, heal inside me, cause me to reconstruct my cells? Like, it's just the deeper you go, even just in the science of it, spirituality aside, it opens up to these possibilities that I feel like spirituality has been talking about for thousands of years. So I do feel that there's such a you can just feel palpable shifts. It's not just this mind activity. It's this whole form and formless, I suppose, activity of just bringing your awareness to something that you're not used to bringing your awareness to, because we live inside these bodies, and most of us, not even in our bodies. In my 20s, I had no mind body awareness. I was just in my head the whole time, wondering why I felt depressed or anxious. And it's like, well, all I'm doing is giving more power to the one narrative that is constantly running my reality. And it's just the thoughts. And so it's been this gradual process of like, okay, then the body, then the feelings. What about just beyond the body? What about what's beyond that? And so I feel like that practice is the next step that I need to really expand the awareness even beyond what I've been practicing so far.
Oh, that's beautiful. Well, Melissa, if you do the wheel, let's talk again, because it'd be fun to dive in there. It's so beautiful to hear what you're saying has been your journey. And, the idea of learning, however we do it, whatever practices to adjust this identity lens is so important. Dacher Keltner is a wonderful scientist at UC Berkeley who is coming out. He has a book on awe. And awe, compassion, and gratitude used to be called traditionally, self-transcendent emotions. And I said to Dacher, that is making a reaffirmation that self is only in your body and you're transcending that. Can we change the name? He said, well, what would you change it to? I said, self-expanding emotions. So that when you're looking at that tree, as Dr. Leaf said, or when you're in a forest or going in nature, you do have awe, gratitude, and a feeling of compassion. And that's what the research that Keltner and others have shown for awe. But it is, I think, a moment in our human family to look at that as self-expanding, to see the forest as yourself, so that the spa of sensation is you feel the forest. That's the S. P, perspective. You take the point of view of the forest, the trees. 3, agency. You act on behalf of the forest. So this isn't just an intellectual understanding that we're trying to come to, Melissa and I and you all listening. This is actually a matter of life and death, that whether you're looking at racism and social injustice or the climate catastrophe, humans have excessively differentiated themselves. Making the self separate is killing us. And we have the time to make a difference, because if you then see the awe and gratitude and compassion as self-expanding, think about together with what amazing human beings we are, how we can join and realize this me in a body, we in the relationality of everything, we can actually make a big difference in protecting forests, in protecting humanity, of realizing we have time to make this world a kinder, more love-filled place. So that, one time I did the Wheel of Awareness practice for a parliament. One of the parliamentarians, in the break came to me and said, I can't share what happened in the hub. I said, what happened? And he just started crying. He said, I've never felt so connected to everyone and everything. I've never felt so full of love. And I paused, he paused, we were waiting. I said, so you didn't want to share that? He goes, oh, no. And he pointed to his parliamentarian colleagues. He said, they would think I was weak if I talked about love. So I said to him, after a bit of a pause, I said, so let me ask you a question. If when you're making federal law, when you're making national rules, national policies, do you leave love out of the reasoning? And his eyes got really big. And then he ran over to his colleagues, and I don't know what he said. But we can only hope that with a direct experience, like the Wheel of Awareness or other practices give you, that you realize love is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And it's really the portal through which this integration arises so that you can let love happen. And then when you do that, you get in touch with the God, the generator of diversity, however you want to interpret that. And then we want to really support one another, this idea that we are a me, we are a we. And, when the audio engineer was doing the audio recording of the book, Intraconnected, he started shifting his sense of self, and he wasn't doing the engineering. So I had to go in the other room. I said, what's going on? He says, I don't know. I'm just listening to your words. And it's like expanding me. I said, okay, well, here's what the book is about. So let's just give you an overview. Now you know, but we need somebody to do the audio engineering, in your body. You got to do this in these noun-like entities. So, to me, the Interconnected book is an invitation for people to go deep within their inner self, learn to have an identity lens, use things like stories and science and indigenous and contemplative teachings, practice something like the Wheel of Awareness, whatever you do, to say, okay, as a human family, we can do this. This is absolutely doable. The big question is, will we do it? Because we can. And this just gives us one pathway to understand what the journey needs to be.
And what I always remind myself is that for me, the biggest motivators, inspirations, I should say, for change have been watching other people model it first. And so there's times that I can get in my mind of like, well, I feel like I'm the only one doing this work. How are we going to spread this to the whole world? And I don't think many people realize just the power of, or the effect that your own personal work has on everybody that witnesses it. When they see the change within you, when they see the change within the way you move about the world. And one of the things for me in the last month, I have, like I said, I've been getting these messages. So thank you, by the way, for being a part of my guidance in sort of, I guess I could call it my field of possibilities, the field of awareness, entering it into it and kind of adding to that, because I do this podcast and I reach a lot of people, but my experience of it is often just sort of broadcasting, recording by myself. I do have these beautiful moments of like, it feels like mentorship when I interview people like you. But I've been asking myself, well, how do I expand this? And one of my goals for 2023 is to turn Mind Love into a nonprofit, because I feel like I'm able to reach the people I wouldn't be able to otherwise, maybe be able to give resources that would otherwise be paid. And so I'm really excited about that. And I'm also really excited for people to actually try this field of awareness, to try to expand their consciousness, to see what it's like, because I've had these glimpses of opening myself up to that, of experiencing that place of peace, especially in meditation or plant medicine journeys I've done, or even just in community, in those like high vibrational spaces of love where you can just feel the love around you, and bringing awareness to that and thinking like, oh my gosh, this is what life is about. And so for listeners that are interested in learning more about you, I've gone through your whole book, and it just really drills this down to just a deeper understanding, because you actually go through all of the stages of life, from in the womb to emergence and toddlerhood and adolescence and travel even, and then the choices that we make. And so it helps you to see why we've sort of formed our minds in this specific way, but then also gives hope and the choices that we can make to expand our awareness beyond that, so that we're constantly drilling that in, so that it isn't just a glimpse. It becomes more of the way that we move about the world. So for listeners that are interested in learning more about you and finding your book, where's the best place for them to connect?
Well, you can connect through our school, the Mindsight Institute. So that's mindsightinstitute.com, or Dr. Dan Siegel, DrDanSiegel.com. And, you can get the book anywhere where books are sold. And I would love to hear from you, because this is a conversation as a human family that we can each cultivate. We have the capacity for pervasive leadership, which means every individual is capable of actually making a difference, and you matter more than you think. So taking this in and really feeling it and experiencing it, and then having the words to be able to articulate it, gives the fullness to what this journey can be.
All the links for this episode will be at mindlove.com/282. Your challenge for this week is to practice the wheel of awareness. I find this is a really good amalgamation of a lot of different practices that I've learned. Most notably, meditations from the research of Joe Dispenza. So I've been really loving this practice lately. And for members, I've created an adapted wheel of awareness meditation for you in your members Nook. So log in to get that. If you're not a member yet, go to mindlove.com/membership to see all of the amazing things that it has to offer. But I want you to remember, when you're doing something like the wheel of awareness, whether you join the membership or you decide to follow the instructions given in this episode, this isn't just a one-time thing to feel good, although that does tend to work. These are ways that, if practiced consistently, you actually train your brain to behave differently in times of stress, in times of chaos. You might not find yourself becoming stressed as often. You might realize that you're able to find a sense of peace sooner than you would have otherwise. These practices actually do rewire your brain. You can tell through meditations, especially specific types of meditations based on brain scans, that the matter in your brain is actually changing. So these are really, really powerful exercises, and I highly recommend that you give it a try. The adapted one that I've created is only 7 minutes long, so it's really easy to add to your daily practice, to create a morning routine around, and I want to know how you feel. So reach out to me at mindlovemelissa on Instagram. And if you loved this episode, please consider sharing it by taking a screenshot, tagging mindlovemelissa and mindlovepodcast. I love seeing all you guys share. I love to reshare the things that you guys share. Again, you can find information on MindLove membership at mindlove.com/membership. And you can find all of my amazing sponsors at mindlove.com/sponsors. And that's all for today. So thanks for giving your mind a little love today, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks for tuning into Your Higher Frequency with MindLove. Head to mindlove.com for a free gift to keep your vibes up until next week.